Welcome, everybody, to this RSAA webinar. Welcome to everybody in the room. We're delighted to have so many of you here today, and welcome to our online audience as well. We are fortunate today to have Richard Wilding. I would be grateful if people in the room could be quiet. Thank you very much. We're fortunate today to have Richard Wilding talking about the Kurdish Revolt of 1922, together with Dr. Shwani from the University of Suleimani. Richard, many of you will have seen before. He's spoken to us on a range of subjects, but Kurdistan is really at the heart of everything that he has been working on for several years. So it's a pleasure to have him back, and I'm delighted to have so many of you here. Without any further ado, I'll hand over to Richard, and we can get started.
It's rather apt to be giving a talk today about a king, given the recent coronation in London. But this is really a story not just of one king, but two kings with very different fortunes. I'd like to begin with an introduction to the Kurds. As you see on this map, the Kurds are an ethnic group distributed between the modern states of Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and Syria. And for today's story, we're looking to the Kurdish region that sits within the modern state of Iraq, as indicated by the arrow, specifically the area around the city of Suleimani, we see here. In modern-day Iraq, the three largest demographic groups are Shia Arabs in the center and south, Sunni Arabs in the center and northwest, and Kurds in the northeast, as indicated again by the arrow. Until the creation of Iraq after World War I, this region was known to the British as Mesopotamia, the Greek name for the land between two rivers. It was a cradle of civilization, the site of Nineveh and Babylon. However, this long history is not the subject of today's talk, so I'm going to begin with the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans conquered Mesopotamia in the early 16th century, but never gained complete control, and their geographical reach was maintained through local proxy rulers. Several Kurdish emirates existed in the 16th to 19th centuries during the state of continuous warfare between the Ottoman Empire and Safavid Iran. And one of these was the Principality of Baban, again indicated here by the white arrow. When the Ottomans arrived in Suleimani, the Baban princes had already established themselves in the region then known as Shah-e-Zur. But the modern history of the Baban begins with the rise of Baba Suleiman in 1670. In 1784, Ibrahim Pasha built the new town of Suleimani, or Suleimaniya, possibly on the site of an earlier town established by Baba Suleiman. In the decades following the Treaty of Ezram in 1823, the Persian threat was reduced, and the Ottomans brought the Kurdish emirates under more direct control. And in 1847, the last Baban prince, Ahmed Pasha, was defeated, and the Baban autonomy came to an end. In modern times, up to 1918, the Ottoman Empire was divided into vilayets, and the Iraq of today is composed of the former vilayets of Basra, Baghdad, and Mosul. The Kurds in what is now Iraq were concentrated mostly in the Mosul Vilayet, which was divided into the three sanjaks of Mosul, Kirkuk, and Suleimani. And sanjaks were later on referred to as Liwa. At its height, the Ottoman Empire had ruled the Middle East, much of North Africa, and southeastern Europe. But by the late 1800s, the empire was in decline. Unsuccessful wars had weakened the Ottoman military, driving them out of Egypt and North Africa. The empire owed more than £2 million to European banks, and trade had fallen behind powers such as Britain and France. The Ottomans did, however, retain many strategic coastlines and waterways, which were coveted by the great European powers. Before 1914, the British really had no intention of annexing any part of the Ottoman Empire. Since the early 19th century, British foreign policy had been to protect the Ottoman Empire against the Russians and other predators. This was mainly to safeguard the British route to India via the port of Basra and the Persian Gulf, as we see here. In 1911, Winston Churchill was made First Lord of the Admiralty, and Churchill sought to modernize Britain's Royal Navy by adopting oil as fuel for its ships instead of coal. The benefits of this were proven, but while Britain's domestic production of coal was plentiful, it had no source for oil. In June 1914, Churchill convinced the House of Commons to authorize a government purchase of a 51% share in the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. 2 weeks later, an assassin killed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo. And 6 weeks after that, Germany attacked France. The Great War had begun, and by its end, war without oil would be unimaginable. The German government had been hoping that the Ottomans would enter the war on their side, but Istanbul was undecided. On the 29th of October 1914, Ottoman ships raided ports on the Russian coast in a brazen display of hostility. The Russians declared war on the 2nd of November, followed by the British and the French 3 days later. An Indian expeditionary force was sent to the Gulf to protect Basra and the Anglo-Persian Oil Company's Abadan oil refinery against possible Turkish attack. The safety of Basra and Abadan required defense in depth against the Ottomans still holding the rest of Mesopotamia. This required the occupation of Baghdad, but a series of setbacks meant the provincial capital was not taken until August 1917. Meanwhile, secret agreements were being made for the partition of Ottoman territory in the event of an Allied victory. The French demanded control of Syria, while Britain wanted to control the Persian Gulf and keep possible rivals away from Basra. Their negotiations, led by Sir Mark Sykes and Francois-Georges Picot, resulted in the now infamous Sykes-Picot Agreement. A parallel set of proposals had been developed by the British in Cairo, which were later said to be inconsistent with Sykes-Picot. In a series of letters exchanged with the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein bin Ali, the British government agreed to recognize Arab independence after the war in exchange for the Sharif and his Hashemite family launching an Arab revolt against the Ottoman Empire. Led by Emir Faisal, second son of the Sharif Hussein, Arab forces expelled the Ottomans from the Hijaz, a campaign later romanticized by T. Lawrence. On the 5th of October 1918, with the blessing of the British General Allenby, Faisal declared the formation of an Arab government in Damascus. An armistice was signed with the defeated Ottoman Empire at Mudros on the 30th of October 1918, and hostilities ceased the following day. The British troops pursuing the Ottoman army were then 40 miles south of Mosul, and military occupation of the city did not take place until the 10th of November. Since this occurred after the armistice, the Turks continued to claim until 1926 that Mosul was theirs. To counter Turkish claims in the Mosul Vilayet, the British hoped to establish one or more Kurdish provinces to be loosely attached to whatever administration might ultimately be established in Baghdad. With this in mind, British political officers had been in contact with prominent Kurds in the Kirkuk and Soleimani Liwas, in particular with Sheikh Mahmoud Bazengi, head of the leading Sayyid family of southern Kurdistan. Sayyid is an honorific surname bestowed upon descendants of the Prophet Muhammad. In addition to being a Sayyid, Mahmoud was also a Shaikh, the head of an important branch of the Quderi Sufi order. Sheikhs of outstanding personality have commonly been credited with the power of working miracles, attracting the veneration of their disciples. They and their descendants have, in consequence, tended to also acquire worldly power. The principal narrative for this story is told from a British perspective, as well as the common link between its main characters, is provided by Cecil Edmonds. Edmonds studied Arabic, Turkish, and Persian at Pembroke College, Cambridge. After the declaration of war, he was summoned to Basra in April 1915. In December 1916, Edmonds was posted to Shushtar, the ancient town near the principal oil field of the Anglo-Persian Oil Company. There he had as colleagues Major Sohn to the north as assistant political officer, or APO Dizful, and Major Noel to the south as APO Ahwaz. Both these characters were to feature later in our story. In 1919, Edmonds was given a new position in Kirkuk, where he begins his narrative by describing the region's Kurdish tribes. Perhaps the most important tribe of southern Kurdistan, the Jaf, consisted of a ruling aristocratic family settled in Halabja. and a number of nomadic clans. Towards the end of their administration, the Ottomans had appointed Osman Pasha of the ruling Jah family as governor in Halabja. However, authority had passed even during his lifetime to his wife Adela Khanum. By the time of the British occupation, Adela Khanum was a widow and became a staunch supporter of the British administration, who affectionately referred to her as Lady Adela. Cham Chamal and Bazian were the territory of the Hamawand, probably the most celebrating fighting tribe of southern Kurdistan. They had supported the Baban princes against the Ottoman Empire, and after the extinction of the principality, continued to be a menace to the Ottoman administration. On several occasions, the Hamawand transferred themselves for several years across the Persian frontier. After one Hamawand rebellion in 1888, their chief was assassinated by the Persians. They fled back to Bazian and were subsequently exiled by the Turks, half to Tripoli and half to Adana. The Hamawand's fighting return from North Africa to Bazian 7 years later is among the greatest epics of Kurdish tribal history. The Pijdar tribe controlled the remote district around Rania. Babakar Aga was the chief of Pijdar, but a claim to this title by his cousin, Abbas and Mahmoud Aga, resulted in diverging loyalties later in our story. Major Noel, previously a colleague of Edmund's in Persia, was sent to Soleimani to set up a temporary system of administration under Sheikh Mahmoud. In November 1919, the British Secretary of State informed the British Civil Commissioner in Baghdad that, and I quote, "Kurdistan must be left to its own devices, and the practical question is how this can be done consistently with peace and security on the Mesopotamian frontier. We are advised by Noel that there are three essential conditions: that Turkish authority should be excluded from Kurdistan, that Kurdistan should not be partitioned, and that the frontier should follow, as nearly as possible, the ethnological line between Kurds and Arabs. Noel's view is that Kurds, if left to themselves, will be strongly pro-British and will need no encouragement or assistance from us to keep the Turks out." However, Cecil Edmonds questioned whether Sheikh Mahmoud understood the role that the British had in mind for him, and I quote again, "I have no doubt that Sheikh Mahmoud saw a benevolent British government intervening, not to exercise any control over his rule, but only to prevent the Persian and future Arab governments from interfering." In Soleimani, Sheikh Mahmoud and his followers wanted more than just a puppet administration. There was a conviction rooted in its history that the town was a preordained capital of a future Kurdish state. In the words of Cecil Edmonds, the belief had little apparent justification, either in the physical appearance or commercial importance of the place, but it was always in the air and seemed to give what was little more than a tumble-down village something that I can only describe as a personality so strong that few Kurds could stay there very long without succumbing to its heady influence. At the date of the British occupation, less than 70 years had elapsed since the end of Baban rule, and most of the adult population must have heard from their parents glowing and no doubt much embellished accounts of those earlier days of Kurdish independence. A poem, The Baban Land, by the celebrated Kurdish poet Sheikh Riza Talabani, expresses feelings that were doubtless widely shared. "I remember Soleimani when it was the capital of the Babans. It was neither subject to the Persians nor slave-driven by the House of Uthman." When Major Noel arrived in November 1918, corpses were lying in the streets and empty houses of Soleimani. His first duty was to provide food and clothing for the destitute. These humanitarian services were recalled with gratitude in later years. Sheikh Mahmoud was informed that Kurdish tribes wishing to accept his leadership would be allowed to do so. He was given the title of Hukmdar, or ruler, with a political officer to advise him. In April 1919, Major Noel was replaced by Major Sohn, also previously a colleague of Edmund's in Persia. Sohn, a man of very different temperament, imposed a direct administration, more like the rest of the occupied territories. Major Sohn had originally worked as an accountant at the Imperial Bank of Persia, where he learned the Persian and Kurdish languages and converted to Islam. In 1909, he had made the journey described in his book, Through Mesopotamia and Kurdistan in Disguise, in which he traveled as a Persian to Soleimani and Halabja, for a time staying as a guest of the Jah family. Sensing that he was about to lose much of his autonomy, Sheikh Mahmoud organized an uprising He was joined by the rest of the Bazinja clan and also important elements of the Hamawand and Jaf tribes. Surprising Soleimani at dawn on the 23rd of May 1919, in a few hours, Mahmoud had imprisoned the British personnel, seized the treasury, and hoisted his flag, a red crescent on a green background, in place of the Union Jack. It was clear that a full-scale operation would be required by the British to retake Soleimani. Edmonds was to accompany the expedition, which left Kirkuk for Chamchamal on the 15th of June, 1919. The next morning, Edmonds was up at 3:30 for reconnaissance towards the Bazian Pass, which Sheikh Mahmoud was reported to be holding on both sides. Edmonds described the dramatic setting for the pending confrontation, and I quote, "In the clear morning light, we could see the long wall of the Karadag coming up from the southeast, dipping down in front of us to form the V-shaped gap that has been the scene of so many locally decisive battles. On the 18th of June, before daybreak and in complete silence, British infantry began to scale the heights on each side of the gap and had nearly reached the top when, with the first light of dawn, their guns opened fire." Edmonds says little of the battle itself, but goes on to describe how he questioned two captured officers who had both seen Sheikh Mahmoud injured. Edmonds then received a note saying that a well-dressed Kurd, evidently a person of some importance, had been found lying wounded by the roadside. Edmonds found the man a little further on, describing him as wearing voluminous Kurdish trousers tucked into top boots of Russian pattern. One boot was ripped open at the ankle, and blood was oozing through his shirt at the waist. Captain Bond, the APO for Chamchamal, was sent to Bazian to identify the distinguished prisoner, and on arrival, confirmed that it was indeed Sheikh Mahmoud. A statement published by the British on the 3rd of August announced that the whole of southern Kurdistan had been pacified. Sheikh Mahmoud, as soon as he was sufficiently recovered, was tried by military court for rebellion and condemned to death. The sentence was later reduced to one of 10 years' imprisonment, and he was sent to India. But this was not the end of Sheikh Mahmoud. In contrast with the dejected image of the captured Sheikh Mahmoud, here we see Emir Faisal, who we last saw in Damascus, appearing in our story again, backed by T. Lawrence and other influential British figures. In January 1919, Emir Faisal led an Arab delegation to the Paris Peace Conference. With the support of Gertrude Bell, he argued for the establishment of independent emirates for Arab regions previously ruled by the Ottoman Empire. On the 8th of March 1920, Faisal was proclaimed king of an Arab kingdom of Syria by the Syrian National Congress in Damascus. Faisal's reign was to last just 4 months. At the San Remo Conference of April 1920, the League of Nations mandate for Syria was allocated to France, and the mandate for Mesopotamia to Britain, reflecting the earlier Sykes-Picot Agreement. Faisal's dream of an independent Arab kingdom of Syria was ended in July when the French ejected him from Damascus. The British, especially T. Lawrence, believed that Britain had reneged on its promises to the Hashemite family and, in effect, owed Faisal a kingdom. The Treaty of Sèvres, signed by the Allied powers and Turkey on the 10th of August 1920, defined the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire and included provisions for an independent Kurdish state. However, these terms stirred hostility back home in Turkey, where the treaty's signatories were stripped of their citizenship. From the end of 1918 until 1921, the situation in Iraq remained dangerously unstable. The British military administration was seen as infidels by the Shia majority and by many Sunnis who regretted no longer being under the caliphate. In 1920, a revolt began in Baghdad and spread to Shia areas in the south. Its demands were independence from British rule and the creation of an Arab government. In March 1921, Winston Churchill, by then Secretary of State for the Colonies, convened a conference in Cairo. The British government, alarmed over their position in Iraq, agreed to support the fugitive Faisal as candidate for a newly created throne of Iraq. The British hoped that Faisal, as a direct descendant of the Prophet, would be granted sufficient legitimacy by the Arabs, but as an outsider in Iraq, he was also weak enough to remain compliant to British interests. In June, Emir Faisal reached Basra in a British ship, and on the 23rd of August, after a referendum in which the affirmative vote was officially returned as 96%, was proclaimed king. The Liwa of Soleimani refused to participate in the referendum, while the dissenting 4% was chiefly accounted for by Kirkuk, where the Turks favored a ruler to be chosen from the House of Osman, and the Kurds asked for a Kurdish administration. No representative from either Liwa attended the ascension ceremonies. After the Treaty of Sèvres, the Turks redoubled their efforts to impress upon the inhabitants of the Mosul Vilayet that it was not worth the paper it was written on. There were threats of invasion, warnings to traitors, and above all, the religious appeal for loyalty to the Sultan, who was also Caliph. In 1922, Major Sohn left his post in Soleimani to be replaced by Major Goldsmith. Edmonds took up a temporary post in Halabja. He describes the atmosphere on his arrival as distinctly jittery, with the outgoing APO on the verge of a nervous breakdown. At Rania, sections of the Pijdar tribe were in open rebellion. In August 1921, tribesmen had attacked the town with the aid of Turkish soldiers. Moreover, the APO had contracted a personal blood feud by shooting dead a local Aga. Meanwhile, the Bazinja sheikhs were conducting an intensive war of nerves, hoping to secure the eventual return of Sheikh Mahmoud. The British were averse to the use of imperial troops in a remote area of no interest to them. Most of the British officials in Baghdad refused to accept that the Kurds, who had chosen to stay outside of the new Iraqi state, had any right to their assistance. In the absence of any will to govern on the British side, there seemed to be two possible options. The first would have been a unilateral decision to incorporate Soleimani and Kirkuk into the Iraqi state, whether the people liked it or not. But this would have been a breach of assurances which had been given in the British Parliament that the Kurds would not be forced into subjection to an Arab government. The second was the replacement of direct by indirect rule through a prominent Kurdish personality who could command general support and would not be vulnerable to Turkish propaganda. A senior representative of the Baban family, who was encouraged to visit Soleimani from Baghdad, was found to know no Kurdish whatsoever and to be interested only in the past history of his family. Major Goldsmith recommended that Sheikh Mahmoud should be reinstated, but Edmonds and Major Noel expressed grave doubts about the wisdom of bringing back Mahmoud. Edmonds proposed to look further afield to Syed Taha, grandson of a celebrated sheikh in Turkey. In May 1922, Edmonds took up a new post as APO Rania. One of the first communications he received was a note signed by the hostile Pijdar affiliated to Mahmoud Aga, stating that, owing to the concentration of governmental favors on Babaka Aga, they were precluded from calling on him to pay their respects. The Turkish government had given one of their agents, Ramzi Bey, the title of Kaymakam of Rowandas and dispatched him to the district. On his arrival towards the end of May, he gave assurances of the imminent arrival of large Turkish reinforcements, with the help of which Soleimani, Kirkuk, and Erbil were to be wrested from the British. He was followed in the middle of June by Colonel Ali Shafiq, popularly known as Uzdemir, meaning pure iron, who was to play the leading role in inciting rebellion among the Kurdish tribes. At the end of May, the Turkish incitement triggered a Hamawan revolt led by Karim Ifat Beg, who had joined Sheikh Mahmoud in the rebellion of 1919. Karim invited Captain Bond and his colleague, Captain Makant, to meet near the Bazian Pass on the 18th of June, supposedly to come to terms. The two officers, though warned that treachery was intended, considered it their duty to refuse no opportunity for peaceful settlement. Their suspicions were disarmed by the cordial greeting given them by Karim, whose followers then shot them in the back while they rode by his side. By the 12th of August, Karim and the Hamawan reached Rowandas, and on the 31st of August, the British suffered a surprise attack in Daban Diranya, forcing them to retreat. When Edmonds reached Kirkuk on the 4th of September, he learned that the British and Indian personnel had been evacuated from Soleimani the previous day. Before leaving Soleimani, Major Goldsmith had handed over responsibility to an administrative council, who in turn selected as their president Sheikh Mahmoud's brother, Sheikh Kader. Sheikh Mahmoud himself had already been brought back from India as far as Kuwait. The logical development was a decision to allow Mahmoud back to Soleimani. In return, Mahmoud promised to prevent the Turks from entering the Liwa of Soleimani. He also accepted the condition that he would on no account interfere with the affairs of Kirkuk and Erbil. Sheikh Mahmoud left Baghdad for Kirkuk by train on the 20th of September, accompanied by Edmonds and Major Noel. The next morning, when they reached the railhead 4 miles from Kifri, hundreds of horsemen from the local tribes invaded the station, shouting and waving banners. They dragged the Sheikh away in triumph before an official deputation from Soleimani could give their speeches of welcome. While at Kifri, Edmonds met leaders of the Soleimani deputation and was impressed by the seriousness with which they were taking themselves as members of a temporary Kurdish national administration. Sheikh Mahmoud may have been sincere when he gave the assurance that he would confine his activities to the Liwa of Soleimani, but the rapturous welcome quickly erased any memory of the limits placed upon him. He reached Soleimani on the 30th of September and was greeted as ruler of an independent Kurdistan. The local press emphasized that Major Noel, who had been appointed as liaison officer, was nothing more than a consul to serve as a go-between with the High Commissioner. On the 10th of October 1922, a decree given in Soleimani, the capital of Kurdistan, announced the formation of a cabinet. In November, Sheikh Mahmoud assumed the title of king. On the 22nd of December, Edmonds delivered the following announcement from the British and Iraqi governments. I quote, "His Britannic Majesty's government and the government of Iraq recognize the right of the Kurds to set up a Kurdish government and hope that the different Kurdish elements will, as soon as possible, arrive at an agreement between themselves as to the form which they wish that government should take." This text, in particular the use of the words Kurdish government rather than Kurdish administration, went far beyond anything which the Iraqi government and High Commission had previously endorsed. At the beginning of January 1923, Sheikh Mahmoud hoisted his flag in Rania. As the town was within the Soleimani Liwa, this was a legitimate move within the conditions laid down at the time of his return. Around this time, however, Edmonds intercepted correspondence from Uzdemir revealing planned attacks on Kirkuk and Koya in collusion with Sheikh Mahmoud. On the 20th of February, Edmonds telegraphed a message to Sheikh Mahmoud from the High Commissioner, ordering him to leave Soleimani. The British dropped bombs over the town on the 3rd of March as a final warning, and Mahmoud was reported to have fled the following morning. Sheikh Mahmoud set up headquarters in the Jasana cave near Surdash. He took with him the municipal printing press, and on the 8th of March published the first issue of a newspaper, Bang-e-Haq, the Call of the Truth, printed at the general headquarters of the Army of Kurdistan. On the 5th of May, the British issued an operation order for retaking Soleimani, reading as follows: "We will march to occupy Soleimani town with the object of effecting the defeat of Sheikh Mahmoud and the complete loss of his prestige, and of punishing those tribes which have evinced hostility." The British marched through the Bazian Pass on the 15th of May, repeating their advance of 4 years earlier. They reached Sarshanar just outside Soleimani the following day, where notables of the town had been summoned and messages dropped by air. On the 17th of May, 2 of the rebel detachments came to surrender. 3 days later, Edmonds went with a party to Jasana Cave. Nearby, they found Mahmoud's field telephone and typewriter, together with 2 royal standards. Villages showing any resistance to British authority were systematically burned. In one of his reports, Edmonds summarizes his views on controlling Kurdish resistance as follows: "Strength is what the Kurd understands, and he must be controlled by force, tempered with kindness perhaps, but still ultimately by force." However, Sheikh Mahmoud was unexpectedly given one final opportunity to take control of Soleimani. The British government at home had been pressing for the reduction of imperial troops in Iraq to 6 battalions. On the 29th of May 1923, Edmonds received the surprising news that British forces would be withdrawn from Soleimani in the middle of June. Edmonds delivered a plan to restrict the control of Soleimani to little more than just the central Gaza. Ahmed Beg, son of Adil Khanan, was appointed as Kamakum for Halabja, while Babakar Aga was paid a handsome subsidy and put in charge of the Pijdar country. Sheikh Mahmoud was to be left to his own devices in Soleimani. Sheikh Mahmoud re-entered Soleimani on the 11th of July 1923, with his wider reach now heavily curtailed. The British defined his position in yet another official pronouncement, which Edmonds drafted in the following terms. The High Commissioner has heard that you have returned to Soleimani and has ordered me to inform you that he has made arrangements for the administration of the nearby Khazars. If you interfere in the said districts or intrigue against the government in other ways, the most drastic action will be taken against you. However, when Mahmoud began to expand his authority into the districts forbidden to him, the British bombing raids resumed. Arthur Bomber Harris, then a young RAF squadron commander and later infamous for the bombing of German cities in World War II, reported after one mission in 1924, "The Arab and Kurd now know what real bombing means in casualties and damage. They know that within 45 minutes, a full-size village can be practically wiped out and a third of its inhabitants killed or injured." The peace conference in Lausanne had opened on the 20th of November 1922. Turkey was claiming the whole of the Mosul Vilayet, while the British were asking for a frontier to correspond with its northern boundary. The promise of a Kurdish state made 2 years earlier at Sèvres was off the table. The Treaty of Lausanne, signed on the 24th of July 1923, included the stipulation that the frontier between Iraq and Turkey shall be laid down in a friendly agreement to be concluded between Turkey and Great Britain within 9 months. In the event of no agreement being reached between the two governments within that time mentioned, the dispute shall be referred to the Council of the League of Nations. On 3rd of March 1924, the Turkish Grand National Assembly abolished the caliphate. The Turkish propaganda, which had kept Kurdistan seething like a volcano, had heavily relied until then on the lingering reverence among the Kurds for the supreme head of their religion. Meanwhile, owing to Sheikh Mahmoud's continued interference in the districts forbidden to him, the High Commissioner decided that Soleimani must once more be occupied by ground troops. This was done in the middle of July 1924. Under the terms of the Treaty of Lausanne, Turkey and Britain had been given 9 months to settle the Mosul dispute. As neither side would compromise its position, on the 30th of September 1924, the League of Nations set up a special commission to survey public opinion in all parts of the Mosul Vilayet, asking whether they wished to be part of Turkey or Iraq. Cecil Edmonds was attached to the commission as liaison officer. Edmonds was convinced that Mosul's inclusion in Iraq was of vital importance for the survival and success of the new state. King Faisal himself presented the case to the commission as follows, and I quote, "I consider that Mosul is to Iraq as the head is to the rest of the body, and it is my unshakable conviction that though the question is only one of fixing a boundary between Iraq and Turkey, it is, in fact, the question of Iraq as a whole. Accordingly, the happiness or misery of 4 million human beings is placed in the hands of your honourable commission." When the commissioners reached Soleimani on the 27th of February 1925, they looked forward to hearing the opinion of a population who had given ample proof of their independence. Turkish members of the delegation expected strong support for Turkey. The Kurdish inhabitants had, after all, been in rebellion against the Anglo-Iraqi administration for the past 5 years. Edmonds, however, predicted that the majority would be willing to enter Iraq on the condition that local officials continued to be Kurds and that Kurdish continued to be the official language of the administration and in the schools. Leading citizens, including Ahmed Bag Jaf and Mahmoud's brother, Sheikh Kader, pledged to denounce Turkey in front of the commission. Describing the incompetence and corruption of the Ottoman regime, the witnesses recalled with boastful delight occasions when the Kurds had defeated Ottoman garrisons sent to put them down, and cited the murder of Sheikh Mahmoud's father at Mosul in 1908 as evidence of the hatred between the two peoples. The Mosul Commission concluded its work on the 23rd of March 1925 with the recommendation that Mosul Vilayet should be included in Iraq. The decisive effect of the testimonies heard in Soleimani was demonstrated by various references contained in the Mosul Commission's report. And I quote, "It was in the leeward of Soleimani that the most definitive views were expressed. With very few exceptions, the persons we interviewed pronounced in favor of the Iraqi government. We found a Kurdish national feeling which, though yet young, was reasonable enough, for though the people stated that their supreme desire was for the complete independence, they recognized the advantages of an enlightened and intelligent trusteeship. A treaty between the United Kingdom, Iraq, and Turkey was signed at Ankara on the 5th of June 1926. The estrangement of 11 years between Turkey and Britain was thus brought to an end. In a letter describing the way in which Soleimani had testified in favor of Iraq, Edmonds concluded, "The Kurds of Soleimani have struck what may prove to have been the decisive blow in the fight for the preservation of Iraq, and know it. Can the Iraqi government rise to the occasion and adopt a far-sighted and generous policy towards the Kurds?" With this prophetic question, Edmonds foresees the grim future of the Kurds within Iraq, which is, of course, another story. On the 27th of March 1925, Edmonds departed for Baghdad, where he took the post of Assistant Administrator to the Ministry of Interior. Progressive consolidation of the Iraqi administration's power gradually reduced Sheikh Mahmoud to the status of a fugitive, dodging backwards and forwards across the Persian frontier, until he finally submitted in June 1927. Sheikh Mahmoud was exiled to southern Iraq in 1931, but was allowed to return to Darikali village near Soleimani in 1941, where he remained for most of the rest of his life. Faisal reigned on as king of Iraq until his death until 1933. Sheikh Mahmoud died in 1956, but remains a hero to the Kurdish people to this day, regarded as a pioneer for future Kurdish leaders. In a group picture taken during Cecil Edmonds' farewell visit to Soleimani in 1945, they are shown seated together, the first and only time since their first meeting in 1919, when the two were photographed together. I'd like to just end by saying a great thank you to, in particular, St. Anthony's College at the University of Oxford, and to the family of Cecil Edmonds for giving me permission to use these wonderful photographs from him. And I'd also like to thank the Royal Society for Asian Affairs for hosting us today. I'm going to pass over now to my colleague, Dr. Akko, from the University of Soleimani. And Dr. Akko is going to be presenting more of the Kurdish version of events. Obviously, my story is being told very much from the British perspective, and with many quotes from people like Cecil Edmonds. So, Dr. Akko, I'd now invite you to tell the Kurdish perspective. Thank you very much. We'll have some questions and answers at the end. Thank you.
Thank you. In the occasion of centenary of relationship between the United Kingdom and the city of Soleimani, I extend my thanks and gratitude to the Royal Astronomical Society and the organizers of this important event, and I am honored to participate in the event and present lecture in this regard, hoping that I will be able to enrich the event and add a new information about the relationship. My topic is about the misunderstanding between the British armed forces or British government and the people of Soleimani. The British force, which arrived in Soleimani on November 1980, consisted of a small group comprised of Major Noel, Major Danles, a doctor, a cook, and a number of servants. According to Major Noel's statements, they were given a royal welcome by the people of the city, and this visit to Soleimani was at the invasion of Sheikh Mahmoud. He had written to the British several times in order to visit Soleimani and try to establish contact with them. Due to one of the letters that fell into the hands of Ottoman army in Kirkuk, Sheikh Mahmoud was sentenced to death. But Ali Ihsan Pasha, the supreme commander of the Ottoman army, issued a decision to pardon Sheikh Mahmoud. Some sources say that Sheikh Mahmoud tried to contact the British forces after returning from the Battle of Shu'aiba in Nasiriyah. I would like to point out how interested Sheikh Mahmoud and the people of Soleimani are being treated as allies by Britain. Major Noel himself admitted the respect and love of the people of Soleimani at that time. I say Soleimani because the right word is Soleimani, not Soleimaniya or Soleimaniya. We say Soleimani. Cities in Sulaimani was a distinct city from the rest of the cities in southern Kurdistan. Edmondus mentioned this distinction and said, when we arrived in Sulaimani in 1918, the Emirate of Baban collapsed almost 70 years before. But the people of Sulaimani were proud that their city was the capital of the Emirate of Baban, and they inherited it from father to grandfather. In fact, Sulaimani has been a distinguished city since its founding, because in southern Kurdistan of Iraq, Sulaimani is the only city that has been established as a city and as a capital. Therefore, this feature is not available in any other city in Iraqi Kurdistan. When the construction of the city was completed in 1784, Ibrahim Pasha Baban asked the other regions around Sulaimani to send people to the new city. Because he had moved the capital from Qalachwalan to the new city. Qalachwalan had a very small population. So the Prince of Baban needed a new citizen to build this new city. Likewise, he requested that craftsmen and artisans be sent as far as possible. But in reality, it was very difficult for people to abandon their relatives, families, and jobs and change their place and way of life. Therefore, those who moved to Sulaimani from distant regions such as Kermashan, Sina, Bana, Mariwan, Sharazur, Germian, Koya, and Erbil, Haruler, were brave people in the full sense of word. They were among those who were able to search for a new life away from their relative. Those people, from the moment they arrived in the Sulaimani, abandoned their blood and family ties and created a new relationship based on civility. So a new community was formed in this city. The newcomers were free in Sulaimani. Therefore, we do not now find any of the original inhabitants of Sulaimani bearing any tribal title. In the city of Sulaimani, surnames are usually either the professions of a person of the professions of his family, or a title given to him by the people of the city. And this is what made their residents of the city different from the residents of the other cities, such as Mosul, Baghdad, and Basra. But the British were very wrong on this point, because they wanted to treat the people of Sulaimani as the trade people of one of the cities in India, or Basra or Baghdad. Actually, Sulaimani was a different city, where the Ottoman built two schools in this city, Al-Rushdiya Military School and Al-Rushdiya Civil School. This was another feature of the city, where elite officers and intellectual educated people graduated from these two schools and played an important role in the government of Sheikh Mahmoud and the newly established Iraqi state. They also played an important role in intellectual and journalistic movement in the Sulaimani and southern Kurdistan. Among most prominent personalities who graduated from the two schools are Pir Emir, Amin Zaki Bak, Majid Mustafa, Rafiq Helmi, Sadiq Pasha Qadri, etc. since the beginning of the founding of the city. The great mosque of Sulaimani was built. This mosque was not only a place to worship, but also a great center of religious science. Hundreds of students from all over Kurdistan graduated from this mosque. At that time, Sheikh Ma'ruf Nodei was teaching in the great mosque. At the same time, Sheikh Maulana al-Naqshbandi Sheikh Maulana Khalid al-Naqshbandi, after the return from India, spared the Naqshbandi tariqat. If we can say path, Naqshbandi path, while Sheikh Ma'ruf Nadi and the Barjindis belong to the Qadri path. The Baban princes supported the Qadriya path, and eventually a conflict happened between the two sects, which led Maulana Khalid al-Naqshbandi to leave Sulaimani and move to Baghdad, then to Damascus. The conflict had a positive role in enriching the mind of the people of Sulaimani. At the same time, as mentioned earlier, the city was the capital of the Emirate, Baban, and it was an active city. When arrived in Sulaimani, Major Swan says, in the city had more than 150 workshops making and repairing weapons. At that time, there were a large number of Jews and Christians living in Sulaimani, and these two communities played an important role in the area of trade and industry and were highly respected by the Baban princes and religious people. All these points made Sulaimani a different city. Dozens of great and famous poets like Salim, Kurdi, Nali, Mahwi, Biremer, Goran, etc. were born in the city of Sulaimani. Dozens of newspapers such as Peshkautan, Roji Kurdistan, Banji Kurdistan, Umedi Istiqlal, and Banji Haq been published. Dozens of political movements and uprising erupted after the fall of Sheikh Mahmoud's government, but unfortunately, the British government did not care about this aspect. The British authority wanted to treat Sulaimani as an Indian and or Arabic city. This was the reason for the misunderstanding and problems that occurred between the people of Sulaimani and the British political officers during the reign of Sheikh Mahmoud and beyond. In fact, the British could have understood the demands of the Kurdish people in southern Kurdistan more actually and better by understanding the people of Sulaimania and their demands. The violent treatment of some British political officials and ignoring the feeling and demands of the people of the city created many problems for both sides. In fact, this situation put Britain in a southern Kurdistan and Arab states in a bad situation. Britain wanted to repeat the experience of 200 years of this role in India and everywhere else, regardless of the great difference between the people of Kurdistan and other regions, such as religions, customs, traditions, intellectual difference, etc. I think when British government tried to copy the rulers of India in Iraq, such as in Basra and in Baghdad, this situation occurred to a revolution of 1920, because we know that Iraqi society or Kurdish society is different from Indian society in everything, not just in religious or in their habits or in tradition, everything. But that mistake led to the revolutions of Sheikh Mahmoud and his uprising in Sulaimani. That's my vision as a Kurdish to the problems between United Kingdom and the Kurdish people, especially in Sulaimani city, because we have another vision, maybe different from the British vision about the mistakes and the misunderstanding between the both sides. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much indeed, Dr. Akko and Richard Wilding. Could I say, first of all, for those online, you have an opportunity to put questions to our two speakers. If you wish to, please use the question and answer box at the bottoms of your screens. and we'll keep an eye on that. But for the moment, because I know there are no questions waiting online, let me ask the audience in the room if you have questions you would like to ask. Please wait until the microphone has reached you before launching into your question, though, because otherwise people won't be able to hear you. Thank you. Gentleman over there.
Thank you, both of you, for those very, very interesting pair of talks. One observation that came to me during that was particularly during the second uprising, inviting Sheikh Mahmoud back from India, reflected a degree of naivety, both in the British, that there would be no further rebellion, but also from Sheikh Mahmoud that any rebellion he would make wouldn't be quashed quite quickly. Is that a fair assessment? And what might that teach us about diplomacy today when it comes to installing leaders in parts of the world that we have interests in of this moment?
I think, overall, I think that the story on both sides was one of continued frustration. And I think that's very much the case for both for the British and for Sheikh Mahmoud. I think that there was a fundamental misunderstanding. And each time, I think, both sides thought that a satisfactory compromise had been reached, only to find out that actually they still had a very different view of what autonomy meant. I think that the British thought that they could give Sheikh Mahmoud a clear set of instructions and that he would follow them to the letter. And of course, that wasn't palatable to Sheikh Mahmoud and his followers. So I think it was an unresolved situation. And every time they thought they'd reached an agreement, it was only to last a brief period before it came back to outright confrontation. Dr. Akko, do you have anything to add to that?
When Sheikh Mahmoud came back Kuwait and then to Baghdad, in Baghdad, he met the High Commissioner of Britain and the King Faisal, and they told him clearly, you must collect and mobilize an army and attack the Rawanda city to kick out the small group of Ozdemir, the Turkish group. That is the main reason who came back Sheikh Mahmoud, and the British realized the impossibility of filling Sheikh Mahmoud's political and social status with anyone else. Because that led him to came back to Sulaimani. But Sheikh Mahmoud said, I know they wanted me to be a Raja. I am not Raja. I'm not policeman. I want independence to Sulaimani and to Kurdistan. In his mind, Kurdistan, it means from the border of Iran till Kirkuk. And Kirkuk is in his mind is one of the Kurdish city. Maybe he wanted to occupy the city and to rule this city as such as Sulaimani and Hawler and Badinan.
I think the other point to make here is that I think that there was a difference between the British administrators in Kurdistan at that time and the government back home in London. So situation was constantly changing. So you would find that an arrangement had been agreed between Sheikh Mahmoud and the British administrators in Kurdistan, only for the situation in London to then change. So, for instance, when the British government decided to reduce the numbers of troops, that would then affect the situation in Soleimani. So it was a constant changing situation.
I'm just going to take a question online first, but then a gentleman, Abdul Rahim, has put the question. He says that according to the family of Sheikh Mahmoud, the British, with the help of Arab doctors, poisoned Sheikh Mahmoud and killed him. What could you say about that? If I've understood the account properly, Sheikh Mahmoud died in the 1950s. So 56. I'm not quite sure what would be achieved by poisoning him at that point, but perhaps you can Perhaps you can comment.
In 1956, I think in October, but I don't hear anything about poisoned him. But he was, old man, and his health is not good. So that when he go to Baghdad, he was in a bad health situation. But I don't hear anything about poisoned him.
It is true that he had a British doctor in Baghdad at that time. And there was a famous story of a conversation that took place between Sheikh Mahmoud and the doctor in Baghdad in 1956. And when the doctor was examining Sheikh Mahmoud, he found a bullet still lodged in Sheikh Mahmoud's body, presumably from the time of the rebellion. And the doctor said that this bullet should really be removed. And Sheikh Mahmoud made a joke about this bullet and saying it's a bit like the British. If you leave it in, then I have to live with it with the rest of my life, and it will continue to cause me discomfort. If you take it out, it will kill me. So it's a great anecdote that took place between this doctor and him.
Thank you, David. I'm sorry, I think the gentleman in front of you had
that. To what extent do you think the divisions inside Kurdistan, basically between Suleimania and Erbil in the last 30 years in particular, have this historic context as an influential origin?
The more recent divisions between Halia and Soleimani over the last 30 years, how much of this is down to the events that took place in the era that we're talking about?
I don't think so. No any relationship between this period and the 30 years ago. If you talk about the conflict now between Halia and Soleimani, I don't have any idea about this conflict now. But, in 1918, they don't have any problems between Soleimani and Erbil that time, and they respected Sheikh Mahmoud. Khartoum saw us respect Sheikh Mahmoud, Shalazur. Maybe some tribes have problems with Sheikh Mahmoud's family, but I don't think in a political situation they respect Sheikh Mahmoud and they supported him. But now it's a different situation.
I think just to add to that, I think that one of the things that makes Sheikh Mahmoud really special is the fact that he's admired quite universally within Kurdistan, and possibly because it predates all of that more recent division. I think he's a hero.
Sorry, my name's Nick Fieldhouse. What is the prospect of a continuing autonomous area governed by the Kurds in northern Iraq?
I talked about history of Sheikh Mahmoud's period. Now, maybe you have so many, like Turkey, Iran, Syria, maybe Qatar. They don't like to take our independence. No, because our geography of Kurdistan. Maybe now it's not easy to talk about independence, maybe autonomy under the rule of Iraq or in Turkey or in Iran. But if we talk about independence, maybe it's not easy now.
I think that in many ways there's so many parallels between the story that we've talked about today of 100 years ago and the situation now, because in many ways nothing's changed. You have a region that's surrounded by much more powerful neighbors, and it's a very hard dream to realize when you're still so much reliant on those neighbors for your economic and political survival. So it's still a very difficult dream to achieve, I think.
I'm afraid, well, we'll take one more question, William Crawley, but then I am going to have to close. Great.
Thank you, Ashwani, Mr. Crawley. So, I hope this is not too sensitive a question, but can I ask, the two events which still figure large in the historical record and public imagination today are the Armenian massacres, 1915 onwards, and the massacre of Greeks in Shwani in 1922. I want to ask you, what view did Kurdish opinion, and Sheikh Mahmoud in particular, did he express a view about these events and responsibility for them?
The Armenian massacre and the Turkey's the campaigns against the Armenians and the Greeks.
Yes.
Did Sheikh Mahmoud have any views on those? Did he have any communication with other groups of people who were also having issues with Turkey at that time? Do you know of any correspondence?
I think because Sheikh Mahmoud wrote letters, especially to more than the community of the Assyrian and the Armenian, and they supported them. Especially, Sheikh Mahmoud had not any hope for the Ottoman. After the killing his father, his brother, many members of his family in Mosul, because that he knew that the Britain government played a very important role in the political, in the world, because that he tried to build a relationship with them. We know that the Britain government that support the Assyrian in Iraq, in Turkey, in Iran, maybe in Urmia and the Kurdish area. I know Sheikh Mahmoud was a great supporter to those communities, especially in the city of Soleimani. Sheikh Mahmoud was one of his ministers as a Christian, Karim Alaka. Was of the great minister of Sheikh Mahmoud's cabinet in 1919. Karim Alaka was a famous Christian person in the city.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. As I said, I'm afraid we are going to have to stop there. We're about 15 minutes over schedule, but thank you very much indeed for joining us today. Thank you also to all of those who have been with us online. The next event that the RSA is holding is an online-only event on freedom of expression in Iran. So we're staying in the Middle East, albeit moving a little bit further east. That promises to be I think, a very interesting question, because the answer on freedom of expression in Iran is perhaps surprisingly that there is some. But if you want to know more about that, you'll have to join us on the 7th of June. Thank you very much indeed again for being here.